What's going on YouTube? This is Rybo back at the bench, and today I've got another head-to-head knife review. It has been a while since my last head-to-head. I do not do them often enough, and they might be my favorite type of video to record, so I do need to be a little bit better about them. But I bought both of these from Knafs Co. End of last year, so I've had them each for a couple months. This is, of course, the baby Banter. This is the green micarta version. Love this knife. I have reviewed this one, and I have carried this one, as you can see. And then this is the Lander. So this is one I have yet to review, but I have gotten plenty of pocket time with this. A little bit bigger knife, a little bit thinner. These are not the stock scales. I think the one I got just had black. But this is one of their limited edition releases, and we'll talk more about the scales on this in a bit. And then this is, like I said, the green micarta version. Typically these come in, I think, G10, but there's lots of different versions. This green 10, this micarta really spoke to me. I love it. And so that's what that is. I do not have my fancy laminated paper. I keep making them and losing them, so I need to come up with a better system. But the categories for the head-to-head, if you've never seen one of these, there are 9 categories. It's a lot, I know, but we compare the pocket clip, the scales, the overall size, and the overall size considers the efficiency, the height, width, weight, all of that stuff. The ergonomics, the action or detent of the knife, the blade, the steel, the lock system, and the intangible category. For today, I have these sweet stickers. So these are just some bench reviews, Torx head stickers I made in a couple different colors. If you want these, there should be a link in the video description, but I thought they're pretty cool. So this is what I'll be using today for the scoring. Okay, so pocket clip up first. As you can see, the pocket clip on these is pretty much identical. So I'm going to call it a tie. However, I do want to say I like this one better. Why? I don't know. I don't know if it just works on the knife better. I don't know if there is actually a practical difference between these two, but this one is easier to get in and out of the pocket to me. It could just be that the knife is a little bit more lightweight. It could be the tensioning is a little bit different, although it feels pretty stiff to me there. But I have just noticed that I have an easier time getting this knife out of the pocket. However, these are practically the same clip, which this is becoming a pretty popular and common clip for pocket knives these days, the fold over deep carry. I am a fan. Some people are not a fan, and it does seem like a lot of people are coming out with a very similar clip. For me, that's great. I love it, but it's not for everybody. So for this one, I am going to call a straight tie. And now for a bourbon break. All right, next up, the scales. This is an interesting one. So the scales on these are very different. This is, like I said several times already, the green micarta. I love this. This is my kind of scale. A little bit of texture, not too much. I really like the way that micarta wears over the years. I like the way it looks. I like the way it feels. I love this type of scale. This knife is very interesting. So the whole kind of system of the Lander, or the platform of the Lander, is that you can change the scales very easily without disassembling the whole knife. Typically, to do a scale swap on an average pocket knife, you have to really strip the whole thing down. The design of the Lander is such that you don't have to do that. So you can pop these screws out front and back, and you are able to just swap the scales. So it made this really easy. Now, this is really smart for a few reasons. From a business standpoint, and you can probably hear that ridiculously loud car in the background. That guy comes by every night at like 9 o'clock, and it is 10 to 9. So he must have gotten off work early tonight. Yes, so the whole kind of system of this knife and being able to swap the scales is really cool from a business standpoint. It obviously lets them release special editions or limited releases of different scale patterns. and capitalize on that, which I think is awesome. But it also lets people make their own on their 3D printer, or it lets other people step up and sell aftermarket scales. Really, really cool. And so I am going to give the edge to the Lander for that reason only, just because there are so many different options out there potentially for your Lander pocket knife. For me, I actually was not carrying this knife a ton, just didn't really interest me that much until these rainbow trout scales popped up. I snagged them, put them on, and then suddenly it got pocket time. Functionally, it didn't do anything, but it was just a little bit different, a little bit unique. Conversation starter, what have you. So for me, it actually changed how often I was carrying the knife, and I think the scales are fine. They're a little slick for me, but you can do so many different things. You can get so many different type of scales. I think they are really, really sweet. So this one could be a dead tie too, but I'm gonna give the edge to the Lander just because you have a lot of flexibility there. All right. Overall size. So this one is a category that is kind of all inclusive. So it's everything about the size, the weight, the efficiency, and efficiency is the word I always come back to, because I like a good efficient knife. I don't want to have to carry more than I need to. And that is where the Baby Banter shines to me. This is such an efficient knife. To me, it is a perfectly valid primary carry knife on most days. It gives you kind of everything you need for the tasks that you're gonna do around the house or around the workplace or whatever. It's small, but it's very practical. It's very comfortable. You kind of have everything you need. It's very, very lightweight, and it's really, really short in the pocket, a little bit wider, but very short in the pocket, and I think carries very, very well. That real straight back there when you're carrying in the pocket. The Lander is fine as well. It reminds me in terms of size a lot like the Ontario Rat 2. Similar profile, similar weight, size, but it is a little bit heavier and it does have a larger blade. But generally, I think it's a bit clunkier, and maybe the size or the knife that is here is not quite as well utilized. And like this point right here is a good example of that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when it comes to ergonomics. So for me, this is a very, very easy win for the Banter over here. Okay, ergonomics. So again, and I'll just go ahead and throw up, what color should we do? Let's even things out. For me, this is a very, very easy win for the Banter. This is one of the more ergonomic knives for my hand that is out there. You have this forward finger choil, you have this really nice grip here, and it honestly doesn't look super ergonomic beyond that, but it really works for my hand. No real hot spots. I am usually either holding this knife like this or in a pinch grip like this. And I find it very, very comfortable either way. The blade to handle ratio is really, really good. I kind of like when my hand is covering up pretty much everything except for sharpened blade length, but I'm still a decent amount behind that right there. So for me, the size works really, the ergonomics work really, really well. And it's very, very comfortable in my hand. This is really, honestly, one of the biggest issues that I have with the Lander is that it just is not super comfortable in my hand. I get a hot spot from that pocket, which is more due to the design, as they share pretty much the same pocket clip. And I feel like I'm backing off of the knife from where I'd like to be. With the Baby Banter, I'm more up here, but obviously you can't really do that here, at least not safely. And so it just feels awkward and a little clunky to me. I feel like it's not the grip that I want to have on the knife, and then I've got this pocket clip digging in. So the ergos from my hands just don't quite work on the Lander. All right, Action and Detent. So both of these, and we'll talk about lock system later, but both of these are liner locks. And so you would think, similar action, but in reality, they are quite different. And actually, now that I think about it, did I give overall size ergos? Yes, so Action Detent, I'm going to go ahead and give to the Baby Banter. You would think very similar, but the action on the Baby Banter, at least this one, is incredibly smooth and easy to deploy. You barely have to put any force behind this, and that blade just flies out. In fact, I often find myself almost doing a push out this way instead of up. And of course I failed to deploy. I was just about to say, I don't think I've ever failed to deploy, but I am kind of cramped under this camera here. But the deployment on the knife is super, super smooth, and it just has this like glassy, smooth opening and this really satisfying lockup. Listen to this. You hear that? That is like excellent lockup. And so it's just a very easy knife to open and close. This would have a lot of fidget factor, if that's still a thing. The Lander, again, reminds me a lot of the Rat 2 in that it has a very good and very fast deployment, but there's just something, it's just not quite as satisfying. You have to put a little bit more force into it, and when you do that, it does fly out and deploy very, very easily. But for me, it's just not quite as satisfying. Not a knife that you're really going to be slow rolling because of where that thumb stud is. It's really made to open like that. Whereas I think the Baby Banter, I do find myself opening it slower a little bit sometimes, flicking it open. It's just a more satisfying lockup. So I definitely would give the advantage to the Baby Banter. Okay, blade. This one's really tough, and honestly, I'm pretty tempted to call this one a dead tie, and maybe I'll do that. These are similar blades, obviously different in that, they kind of aesthetically fit and from a design standpoint fit the knives that they're on, but both are still fairly similar, right? And both of these are what I would consider to be kind of your prime daily carry blade shapes, right? They're very practical, very utilitarian, good thick spine all the way down to the tip there. You've just got a nice grind here, really nice kind of wider belly of the blade. And I've found them both to be very, very good slicers. I've found them both to be really excellent. I've done a little bit of prying. You can probably see I've got marks up all over this blade, although I guess they're fairly well hidden by the stone wash there. But I find both of these blades to be very, very practical. For me, and I'm just gonna call this a tie, for me, I tend to carry this one more, just because if I'm opening boxes or packages, or kind of scoring tasks like that, even like marking something in the workshop, this blade is a little bit better suited for that, just because it is a little bit stubbier and fatter. I think it's a little bit easier to control. This one is perfectly fine and would be better for some larger slicing things. But for what I'm typically using at, being a longer, skinnier blade is not a huge advantage. It's actually somewhat of a disadvantage because it's a little bit harder to track kind of where your cuts are. For the purposes of this video though, I'm gonna call that a dead tie because that's pretty subjective and that's pretty much up to kind of what you need that day with your knife. So I'll just leave the blade as a tie. Now, the steel. So these are two different steels. You have D2 over here and Nitro V over here. I have a lot of experience with D2, not a ton of experience with Nitro V. So I'm relying a little bit on my own experience, but also some just reading about the two steels. So in my experience, the Nitro V has performed very, very well. It has held a very, very sharp blade. The only issue that I have noticed is that there is some kind of staining on the blade from something. I have no idea what. I don't know if that's just a top finish that's worn off a little bit or if it's actually staining. I have no idea what's going on there. Doesn't bother me in the slightest. My knives are made to be used and abused. Not to be abused, but they are made to be used as tools. And so that doesn't bother me at all. It actually adds to the character. But that is something that probably has something to do with the steel, unless it's just the surface coating of the steel. However, Nitro V has been great. D2 I have no issues with, especially a coated blade like this. Obviously you have parts of this that are uncoated. I've never personally had any issues with it. It's fine, it's not my favorite. But from what I understand, apart from just my experience, Nitro V is the superior steel and is likely to not corrode as quickly as D2. and I think you get a better edge over the long term. So I like the Nitro V just from firsthand experience, and I think it's probably also just objectively better than the D2. All right, where are we? Lock system, and yes, lock system. So like I said, both of these are liner locks. So very similar to the ActionDetent, you would think probably the same, probably a tie, but not at all. There is one knife that is far superior. So with lock system, typically what I'm looking at is one, how easy or how well does it lock up the knife, and how I don't know, how easy is the lock system to handle. But one of the things that I look at a lot is how hard is it to disengage? How easy is it to disengage the knife? If you're going in your pocket all day long, opening, closing, all this kind of stuff, a lot of times doing it one-handed, the ease of closing the knife is one of the first things that can be a ding when I'm reviewing a knife. If a knife is very difficult to close, or if I have to really think about it, it's a really frustrating thing. And so that is often one of my detractors of a knife. And that is really the primary difference between these two. So lock system's the same. I think the lockup is fine. The lockup actually may be a little bit heavier on this one than the Baby Banter. But the issue with the Lander is that there's just not a lot of this liner exposed to disengage that lock. And what is exposed is coated. So it has this black coating on it, and it's pretty round. So those ridges are not super aggressive, and there's just not a lot visible, as you can see from here. So the scales come up and cut right into that. And so you only have an inch or so there that is actually accessible. And you can see that that cutout right there is only the area of the jimping. And so what I have found is that it's just very difficult to get my hand in there, and it doesn't feel very good. I have to really feel like I'm mashing right at the right spot to disengage the knife. Enough that I have to think about it and kind of drive me nuts. On the Baby Banter, however, you can see already a lot more of this liner is exposed, both the jimping area and the non-jimping area. So there's just a lot more here that's accessible. You don't have a cutout on that other side, but you don't need it at all, because this is super, super easy to get to. I can do it with the side of my thumb, disengage that knife and bring it forward, whereas the other knife I'm having to really press right in the right spot. The other thing is I can press, pretty much anywhere here and disengage the knife, because you can see where that starts to bend up. I can press even down here and disengage the knife. That is not an option on this knife because I can't access that spot. It may sound like a pretty big nitpick, but this is one of those things that if you're actually using your knives, it will drive you nuts. And so for me, the advantage is definitely to the Baby Banter. All right, so here we are, not really a close match, and we come to the intangibles category. Let me grab my steel, my natural colored. The thought behind this was like anodized maybe, but there's not really titanium screws that are common, so I don't know if that really holds up, but here's my natural steel colored Torx head sticker for the intangibles, because intangibles, it is the Baby Banter all the way for me. Now this, this looks like more of a, I don't know. When it comes to these two knives, it is clearly this knife that is the winner for me, but that is not to disparage the Lander necessarily. I'll have a full review of this up soon, but between these two, I reach for this one every time. I think it's a more satisfying lockup or action. I think it's a more satisfying lockup. I think it's a more satisfying and more practical disengage. I think it's a much more efficient knife, a much more practical knife. The pocket clip is great. It's a superior steel, etc., etc., etc. The Lander certainly has some things going for it, and it's a neat knife in itself. But for me, if I was picking between the two of these 100% of the time, I would go with the Baby Banter. I think the only thing left for me to check out is the G10 version and see kind of how it stacks up. So this is the head-to-head for me. Clear winner being the Baby Banter. Very interested to hear if you agree or disagree. I'm always very interested to hear how weird or wrong I am in these videos. And until next time, I will see you then.